Good morning. I'm Pastor Heather, and I'm here with a devotion on an everyday object. Today's object is oil. During the season of Lent, we are offering devotions each week on something that you might find in your house or in your everyday life as a means to connect us with the holy, with God, with the divine who is always with us. So this morning, I made pancakes for my daughter, and one of the ingredients I used was oil, which is really normal in my cooking. I use olive oil for sauteing vegetables or roasting vegetables in my oven. Pancakes often have oil as either a part of the ingredients or to grease the pan. You probably also use oil in your cooking, and maybe not for much else. I know that in my life, oil is mostly an ingredient that's used in my kitchen. But in the ancient world, oil had many, many uses. It was often used as a healing balm to help wounds heal. We might think of now how if you have a scar, you can often put moisturizer on it to help it heal, or how we have our own creams and ointments that we put on wounds. Well, of course, many of those things weren't available in the ancient world, and so oil was used across wounds to help heal them. Oil was also used for anointing. It was used at the coronation of kings, at the anointing of people who would serve in particular roles. It was a sign of a special blessing and responsibility being conferred on someone. Oil was also used to tend to bodies after death. Most often, this was done with perfumed oil so that as the bodies began to decay, they would not smell as bad. In scriptural stories, we see all three of these uses for oil. I think that oil often appears in our scriptural stories as just a small detail that we don't always notice. If you think, for example, of the story of the Good Samaritan, a man finds another man on the side of the road. The man on the side of the road is beaten, and he has had all of his possessions stolen. He's laying there naked. And the Good Samaritan who stops to help him, one of the things that he does is put oil on his wounds. We focus in that story on the Good Samaritan, on how he helped this man and how the priest and the Levite did not, but there's that little detail of how oil is used for healing. You might think of the 23rd Psalm, where the psalmist celebrates that God will anoint his head with oil. There's a beautiful story maybe in all of the Gospels, of a woman who will bathe Jesus in oil. In some of those stories, she bathes his head in oil, which really has the mark of coronating him like a king. In other stories, she bathes his feet and washes his feet with her hair. The oil is noted to be very expensive and perfumed, and that has the connotations of preparing his body for the death that is to come. When we think about the uses of oil in our scriptural stories, we are reminded time and time again that in the same way oil is used for binding and healing wounds, so too God does that for us. The idea of the 23rd Psalm, where God will anoint our heads with oil, both means that God will bless us through that anointing, but also that God is binding up our wounds and healing us. The idea of the woman pouring oil on Jesus before his death, she's caring for him, but I think it invites us to see how God cares for us in those same ways. How even in the midst of our darkest hour, God's healing is there and present with us. And not just God's healing, but God's care for us. It's such a beautiful gesture, the way the woman comes and cares for Jesus that way and pours herself out before him. But really, she's preparing him for death, the death that he will take on in order to bind up our wounds. He will pour himself out in that same way on the cross for us. And of course, as we are journeying towards the remembrance of Jesus's death and then the Easter celebration, we're reminded that the places where God heals us and binds us up, they are places where new life will come out of pain. Often, when I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death in my own life, I am not seeing how God is already binding my wounds and healing me. I'm not feeling the anointing with oil. I'm not seeing the new life that will emerge. But the use of oil in the scriptural stories reminds me that when I have a wound and I first start treating it, the healing does not come right away. It takes some time and effort and care. And often those places of woundedness become the places where I am best able to minister to someone else because I know how they feel. And so as you go about your week, as you encounter oil, most likely in your cooking, but maybe in other places as well, I invite you to think about the ways that God is working healing in our world and in your life. I invite you to think about maybe taking a small bowl and filling it with some water and then putting some oil, just a few drops on top, and placing that somewhere where you might see it regularly this week. As you look at that water, think about the ways in which you are in need of healing. Maybe offer those up to God in prayer. Think about the places where you're experiencing healing. Offer gratitude for those places. Think about the places you have been healed and ask the question, is God going to use those places to minister to others? And how might you offer yourself in the same way the woman offers herself before Jesus as she pours oil on him? If you have ever been anointed with oil, if you have a healing story that you want to share, if you have a prayer for healing, I invite you to put it in the comments below. Let this be a week of sharing our woundedness and our stories of healing with each other, that we might offer thanksgiving to God for the work that God is doing amongst us in this very moment. Grace and peace be upon you this week. I will see you next week for our devotion, and I will be holding you in my prayers.